Have you ever loved someone so deeply that saying goodbye felt like dying? Have you ever stood at the crossroads where duty calls one way and love calls another? In a world where cameras flash and millions watch your every move, imagine having to choose between the person who completes your soul and the responsibilities that define your existence. This is not just another love story. This is the heart-wrenching tale of Emma and James, two souls bound by love but torn apart by circumstances beyond their control. When the weight of expectation becomes too heavy to bear, when public duty demands private sacrifice, and when forever suddenly becomes never again, what happens to a love that was supposed to conquer all? Their story began with stolen glances across crowded rooms and secret meetings under starlit skies. It bloomed into a romance that captured hearts worldwide. But love stories don't always have fairy tale endings, especially when the whole world is watching and waiting for you to choose between your heart and your heritage. Prepare yourself for a journey through the deepest corridors of the human heart, where passion meets responsibility, where dreams collide with reality, and where two people discover that sometimes the greatest act of love is learning how to let go. This is the story that will make you believe in love again, even as it breaks your heart into a million pieces. Emma and James's farewell didn't just move a nation. It reminded us all of the precious fragility of love and the devastating beauty of sacrifice. Their tears weren't just theirs alone. They became the tears of everyone who has ever loved and lost, everyone who has ever had to choose between what they want and what they must do. Are you ready to have your heart shattered and rebuilt? Are you prepared to witness a love so pure it transcends the very forces trying to destroy it? Then step into their world, where every moment is precious because every moment might be the last, and where goodbye isn't just a word. It's the most painful truth two hearts will ever have to face. The autumn rain painted intricate patterns on the tall windows of Ashworth Manor as Emma Catherine Whitmore stood in the grand ballroom, watching the last of the evening's guests disappear into the night. Her emerald gown, which had sparkled under the chandeliers just hours before, now felt heavy against her shoulders. The weight wasn't from the fabric, though. It was from the secret she carried in her heart, a secret that was about to change everything. 26 years of carefully orchestrated public appearances, charity galas, and diplomatic dinners had prepared Emma for many things, but not for James. Never for James. She touched the delicate pearl necklace at her throat, a gift from her grandmother, the late Queen Victoria Whitmore, who had always told her that duty came before personal desires. A Whitmore serves the crown first, the nation second, and herself last, her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. But tonight, as Emma's fingers traced the smooth pearls, she wondered if her grandmother had ever felt her heart breaking the way Emma's was breaking now. The sound of footsteps on the marble floor made her turn. Even in the dim light of the dying chandeliers, she recognized his silhouette immediately. James Alexander Morrison walked toward her with that confident stride that had first caught her attention 3 years ago at the International Medical Conference in Geneva. He wasn't royalty, wasn't nobility, wasn't anything the Royal Protocol's handbook said she should choose. He was simply a brilliant neurosurgeon who had dedicated his life to saving others. And somehow, without meaning to, he had saved her too. The last guest finally left, James said softly as he approached, his dark hair slightly disheveled from the evening's formalities. His black tuxedo was impeccable, but Emma could see the weariness in his brown eyes. The same weariness that had been growing there for months as the pressure mounted from every direction. "I saw," Emma replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lord Pemberton stayed until the very end. I think he was hoping for another chance to discuss the hospital board position with you." James smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "He's persistent, I'll give him that. Though I suspect his interest has more to do with your family's influence than my surgical skills." The silence stretched between them, filled with all the words they had been avoiding for weeks. Emma wanted to reach out, to take his hand the way she had done so naturally just months before, but something stopped her. Perhaps it was the conversation she'd had with her father, King Edward, that morning. Perhaps it was the stack of newspapers on her private secretary's desk, all featuring speculative headlines about her relationship with the commoner doctor. Or perhaps it was the growing realization that loving someone completely didn't always mean you could keep them. "Emma," James began, then stopped. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to love because it meant he was being completely honest with her. "We need to talk about what happened today." She knew exactly what he meant. The photograph. Someone with a telephoto lens had captured them during what they thought was a private moment in the palace gardens. James had been telling her about a young patient, a 7-year-old girl who had painted him a picture of the brain surgery he had performed to save her life. Emma had been laughing, really laughing, the way she only did when she was with him. Their fingers had been intertwined, and, for just a moment, they had forgotten about protocol and propriety and the 100 reasons why their love was considered inappropriate. The photograph had been splashed across the front page of every major newspaper in the kingdom by evening, with headlines ranging from royal romance revealed to princess in love with commoner doctor. Emma's private secretary, Mrs. Thornfield, had spent the entire afternoon fielding calls from reporters, foreign dignitaries, and concerned members of parliament. The council met for 3 hours after the papers came out. Emma said, finally, turning to face James fully. In the soft light, she could see the pain in his expression, and it nearly broke her resolve. Father was diplomatic about it, but the message was clear. And what was the message? James asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. Emma walked to one of the tall windows and pressed her palm against the cool glass. Outside, the palace grounds stretched into darkness, illuminated only by the ancient lampposts that had guided her family's footsteps for generations. That love is a luxury the crown cannot afford. That personal happiness is secondary to public duty. That choosing my heart over my heritage would be. She paused, the words sticking in her throat. Selfish. James moved to stand behind her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, but careful not to touch her. They both knew that any gesture of intimacy could be observed and reported by the palace staff, most of whom were loyal but not all of whom could be trusted with their secrets. Do you believe that? He asked quietly. Emma closed her eyes. This was the question that had been haunting her for months, ever since their relationship had moved beyond friendship into something deeper and more dangerous. She had been raised to believe that her life belonged to her people, that her personal desires were secondary to the greater good of the kingdom. But James had shown her what it meant to live for something beyond duty, to wake up each morning driven by passion rather than obligation. I believe, she said slowly, that loving you has been the most real thing I've ever experienced. I believe that when I'm with you, I'm not Princess Emma or Her Royal Highness or the future queen. I'm just Emma. And I believe that version of myself is worth saving. James's reflection appeared in the window beside hers as he stepped closer. But I also believe that my grandmother was right about some things. That with privilege comes responsibility. That the crown isn't just a symbol of power. It's a promise to serve others before yourself. Emma turned to face him, and, for the first time that evening, allowed herself to really look at him. His strong jaw, the small scar near his left eyebrow from a childhood accident, the way his eyes crinkled slightly when he was thinking deeply about something. She had memorized every detail, storing them away like treasures for the dark days she sensed were coming. The children's hospital you're building in the East End, she continued. The scholarship program you started for medical students from low-income families. The volunteer work you do every weekend at the free clinic. You understand service too, James. You understand what it means to put others first. That's different, and you know it, James replied. I choose those things because they fulfill me, because they align with who I am and who I want to be. I'm not bound by birthright or centuries of tradition. I have the freedom to walk away if I decide this isn't the life I want anymore. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Emma felt something cold settle in her stomach as she realized what he was really saying. And, is that what you're thinking about? Walking away? James was quiet for a long moment, and, in that silence, Emma heard her answer. She had known this conversation was coming, had dreaded it, and anticipated it in equal measure, but knowing hadn't made it any easier to bear. The pressure isn't just on you, Emma, James said finally. Do you know what happened at the hospital today? Dr. Richardson, who's been my mentor for 8 years, called me into his office to discuss the situation. The board of directors wants to meet with me tomorrow to talk about how my personal associations might be affecting the hospital's reputation and funding. Emma felt her heart sink. She had been so focused on protecting James from the royal protocols and public scrutiny that she hadn't fully considered how their relationship might impact his professional life. The Whitmore Foundation is one of the hospital's largest donors, James continued. Several board members are concerned that if our relationship continues and ultimately fails to result in appropriate resolution, it could jeopardize future funding. They're not wrong to be concerned. If I become persona non grata with the royal family, it doesn't just affect me. It affects my patients, my colleagues, the research programs I've developed. That's not fair, Emma said fiercely. Your work speaks for itself. You've saved hundreds of lives, revolutionized pediatric neurosurgery techniques. They have no right to judge your professional capabilities based on your personal relationships. Fairness doesn't enter into it, James replied with a sad smile. Any more than it enters into the expectations placed on you. We're both being asked to choose between love and responsibility, but the difference is that your responsibilities were chosen for you before you were born. Mine are responsibilities I've taken on willingly, and that makes it harder for me to justify abandoning them. Emma understood then what her father had meant when he told her that morning that love often required the greatest sacrifices from those who felt it most deeply. She had thought he was being cruel, trying to manipulate her into ending her relationship with James. Now she realized he had been preparing her for the possibility that James himself might make the choice she couldn't bring herself to make. So what are you saying? She asked, though she dreaded the answer. James moved closer, close enough that he could have reached out and touched her face, close enough that she could see the tears he was trying to hold back. I'm saying that I love you too much to let my love destroy everything you've worked for, everything your family has built, everything you could accomplish as queen. And I love my work too much to watch it crumble because I couldn't make the hard choice when it mattered most. That's not your choice to make alone, Emma protested, her voice stronger than she felt. This is our relationship, our future. We should decide together. And what would we decide? James asked gently. You've spent your entire life preparing to lead this kingdom. You speak 4 languages fluently. You have degrees in international relations and economics. You've traveled to more countries and met more world leaders than most people could name. You're brilliant and compassionate and exactly what this nation needs in a queen. Would we really decide that you should give all of that up to marry a doctor? I would, Emma said without hesitation. If it meant being with you, I would give up the crown, the titles, everything. And I would never ask you to, James replied. Because I know who you are, Emma. I've watched you with the children at the hospital, seen how you light up when you talk about education reform and healthcare initiatives. I've seen you work for 18 hours straight preparing for trade negotiations because you knew the outcome could affect thousands of jobs. You're not just a princess, you're a leader. And leaders don't abandon their posts for love. The truth of his words hit Emma like a physical blow. She had been so focused on the pain of potentially losing James that she hadn't allowed herself to fully consider what giving up her royal duties would really mean. It wouldn't just affect her, it would affect her younger sister Margaret, who would have to take on responsibilities she had never wanted. It would affect her parents, who had spent decades grooming her for leadership. It would affect the thousands of people who worked for charities and organizations under her patronage. There has to be another way, she said desperately. Other royals have married commoners. The rules have changed over the years. Some rules have changed, James agreed. But not the fundamental expectations. Not the reality that your future husband will be scrutinized and judged and expected to conform to a way of life that is completely foreign to him. I've seen what the media attention has done to you over the past few weeks, Emma. You've been different, more careful, more guarded. You're starting to edit yourself even when we're alone together, and that breaks my heart more than anything else could. Emma wanted to deny it, but she couldn't. James was right. The constant awareness that they might be watched, photographed, or overheard had begun to change how she behaved even in private moments. She had started choosing her words more carefully, moderating her expressions of affection, pulling back from the spontaneous intimacy that had characterized the early days of their relationship. I don't want to be someone who changes you, James continued. I fell in love with a woman who laughed freely and spoke her mind and wasn't afraid to be vulnerable. I don't want to be the reason that woman disappears. Emma felt the tears she had been holding back finally begin to fall. So what happens now? We just end this? Pretend we never loved each other. James finally reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. It was the first time he had touched her in weeks, and the simple gesture nearly undid her completely. We acknowledged that we loved each other completely and honestly, and that sometimes love means wanting what's best for someone even when it's not what's best for you, he said. We remember that what we had was real and beautiful and worth every moment of pain it's causing us now. I don't know how to do that, Emma whispered. I don't know how to go back to being just Princess Emma, attending state functions and cutting ribbons and pretending that my heart isn't broken. You don't go back, James said. You go forward. You take everything this relationship has taught you about love and compassion and use it to be an even better leader. You remember what it felt like to be truly happy, and you work to create that happiness for others. Emma looked into his eyes and saw her own pain reflected there. But she also saw something else: acceptance. James had already begun the process of letting her go, and seeing that strength in him helped her find her own. When? She asked. Tomorrow, James replied. I've been offered a position with Doctors Without Borders. A 2-year assignment in Southeast Asia, working on developing surgical programs in underserved communities. I was going to turn it down because I couldn't bear the thought of leaving you, but now it's perfect timing, Emma finished for him. They stood there for a moment longer, memorizing each other's faces, storing up the warmth and love they had shared against the cold reality of their separate futures. I need you to know, Emma said finally, that loving you changed me. It made me a better person, a better princess, and it will make me a better queen. Whatever happens in my life from this point forward, that will always be true. James smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. And I need you to know that being loved by you was the greatest honor of my life, greater than any award or recognition or professional achievement. You taught me that serving others doesn't have to mean sacrificing yourself, and that lesson will guide every choice I make from now on. As the clock in the palace tower began to chime midnight, marking the end of one day and the beginning of another, Emma and James shared their final kiss. It was soft and gentle and tasted of tears and promises and all the tomorrows they would never share. When they finally pulled apart, Emma straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin in the gesture that had been bred into her from birth. Princess Emma was back, and she was ready to face whatever came next. Goodbye, James, she said with a dignity that would have made her grandmother proud. Goodbye, my love, he replied, and then he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing through the empty ballroom until they faded into silence. Emma stood alone in the grand room where they had danced together just hours before, surrounded by the lingering scent of roses and the ghosts of their shared laughter. Tomorrow, she would return to her royal duties, would smile for cameras and shake hands with dignitaries and pretend that her world hadn't just been fundamentally altered. But tonight, she allowed herself to grieve for the life she would never have and the love she would never forget. The dawn light filtering through the heavy curtains of Emma's private chambers felt different somehow, as if the sun itself understood that the world had shifted overnight. Emma had not slept. She had sat in the window seat overlooking the palace gardens, watching the darkness slowly give way to pale morning light, replaying every word of her conversation with James until each syllable was seared into her memory. Her lady's maid, Sarah, knocked softly on the door at precisely 7 o'clock, the same time she had every morning for the past 5 years. Your Royal Highness? Shall I prepare your morning tea? Come in, Sarah, Emma replied, her voice hoarser than usual. She had cried until there were no tears left, then sat in empty silence until the crying started again. Now, in the stark reality of morning, she felt hollow and fragile, like glass that had been cracked but not yet shattered. Sarah entered carrying the silver tea service, her practiced eye immediately taking in Emma's appearance, the evening gown still wrinkled from sitting all night, the smudged makeup, the red-rimmed eyes. Sarah had been with the royal family long enough to know when to ask questions and when to simply provide silent support. Shall I run a bath, Your Highness? Sarah asked gently, setting the tea service on the small table near the window. And perhaps select something comfortable for this morning? Emma nodded, grateful for Sarah's discretion. The blue wool dress, I think. And Sarah? Could you ask Mrs. Thornfield to clear my schedule until noon? I need some time to prepare for the day. Of course, Your Highness. Sarah hesitated for just a moment. Your Highness, if I may, whatever you're facing this morning, I want you to know that the entire staff believes in your strength and wisdom. The kindness in Sarah's voice nearly broke Emma's carefully constructed composure. She managed a small smile. Thank you, Sarah. That means more than you know. As Sarah bustled about preparing the bath and selecting clothes, Emma sipped her tea and tried to imagine how she would get through this day and all the days after it. Her schedule was packed with the usual obligations: a meeting with the Minister of Education about the new literacy initiative, a luncheon with the Ladies' Auxiliary for the Children's Hospital, the irony was not lost on her, and an evening reception for visiting diplomats from Eastern Europe. Just thinking about the hospital luncheon made her stomach clench. It had been planned months in advance, before her relationship with James had become public knowledge, before she had known that loving him would become impossible. Now she would have to sit through speeches about pediatric care and medical advancement, knowing that James was somewhere in the palace preparing for his departure, finalizing the details that would take him halfway around the world. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," she called, expecting to see Mrs. Thornfield with her revised schedule. Instead, her younger sister Margaret slipped into the room, still wearing her riding clothes from her early morning ride through the palace grounds. At 22, Margaret had inherited their father's auburn hair and their mother's vivid blue eyes, along with a refreshing directness that had always been both blessing and curse in royal circles. "Emma," Margaret said, crossing the room quickly to sit beside her sister on the window seat. "I heard about yesterday evening. Are you all right?" Emma set down her teacup with hands that trembled slightly. "How much did you hear?" "Enough to know that you're hurting," Margaret replied. "And enough to know that this isn't over yet, no matter what anyone else thinks." For a moment, Emma allowed herself to lean into her sister's warmth and strength. Margaret had always been the rebel of the family, the one who questioned protocols and pushed boundaries. She had refused an arranged engagement 2 years earlier, choosing instead to pursue her master's degree in international journalism. Their parents had eventually accepted her decision, though not without significant family tension. "It is over, Maggie," Emma said quietly, using her sister's childhood nickname. "James is taking a position overseas. He's leaving today." Margaret pulled back, her eyes flashing with anger. "Today? That's ridiculous. You can't just let him walk away without fighting for this." "Fighting how?" Emma asked. "By abandoning everything I've worked for? By throwing away 26 years of preparation and education? By forcing him to live a life that will make him miserable? By being honest about what you want for once in your life?" Margaret shot back. "Emma, I've watched you for months, and I've never seen you as happy as you've been with James. You laugh differently when he's around. You actually look forward to events when you know he'll be there. You've been more engaged with your charity work because he's shown you what it really means to serve people." Emma stood up and walked to her dressing table, picking up the silver-backed hairbrush that had belonged to their grandmother. "Happiness isn't the only consideration here, Margaret. There are responsibilities, expectations." "Whose expectations?" Margaret challenged. "Father's? The council's? Parliament's? Or some ancient protocol that says royals can't marry for love?" "It's not that simple," Emma insisted, though even as she said it, she wondered if Margaret might be right. "The monarchy exists because of public trust and respect. If I'm seen as someone who puts personal desires above duty, then you're seen as human," Margaret finished. "Emma, the public loved seeing you happy with James. Did you read the letters that poured in after the engagement speculation started? People were writing to say how wonderful it was to see you genuinely in love, how it made the royal family seem more relatable and accessible." Emma had read some of those letters, and Margaret was right. For every critical editorial about appropriate royal behavior, there had been a dozen letters from ordinary citizens expressing joy at seeing their princess find love. Young women had written to say that Emma's relationship gave them hope that they too could find someone who valued their minds as much as their beauty. Mothers had written to say that they wanted their daughters to find the kind of partnership that Emma and James seemed to share. But there were also the critical responses, Emma pointed out. The articles questioning whether a commoner could handle the pressures of royal life, whether James had the breeding and background necessary to support the crown. Written by people who have never met him, Margaret said fiercely. "I've spent time with James, Emma. I've seen how he handles himself in formal situations, how he treats staff members, how he talks about his work and his values. He's more genuinely noble than half the titled men Father has suggested as potential husbands." Emma set down the hairbrush and met her sister's eyes in the mirror. "You don't understand the pressure he's been under. The hospital board, the media scrutiny, the constant analysis of everything he says and does. It's been eating away at him, changing him. He told me last night that he doesn't want to be the reason I become someone different, someone more guarded and careful. And has he become someone different?" Margaret asked quietly. Emma considered the question honestly. Over the past few weeks, she had noticed subtle changes in James. He had become more formal in public, more careful about his words, more aware of how his actions might be interpreted. But underneath those surface adaptations, he was still the same man who spent his Saturday mornings reading to children in the hospital, who remembered the names and stories of every patient he treated, who could make her laugh even after the longest and most tedious royal functions. "He's adapted," Emma said finally. but the core of who he is hasn't changed. Then, the problem isn't that he can't handle royal life, Margaret said. The problem is that everyone around you is so terrified of change that they'd rather see you miserable than risk any challenge to the status quo. Before Emma could respond, Sarah emerged from the bathroom. Your bath is ready, Your Highness. And Mrs. Thornfield has confirmed that your morning has been cleared as requested. Thank you, Sarah, Emma said, then turned back to Margaret. This conversation isn't productive, Maggie. The decision has been made. Margaret stood up, her jaw set in the stubborn line Emma recognized from their childhood arguments. By whom? Because as far as I can tell, the only people who haven't had a say in this decision are you and James. After Margaret left, Emma soaked in the lavender-scented bath water and tried to quiet the voice in her head that sounded remarkably like her sister. Margaret had always been the one to ask uncomfortable questions, to point out the contradictions in their carefully structured royal lives. She had also been right more often than Emma cared to admit. By 10 o'clock, Emma was dressed and attempting to review briefing documents for her afternoon meetings, though the words seemed to blur together on the page. Mrs. Thornfield knocked and entered with her usual efficient demeanor. Your Highness, I have several matters that require your attention, Mrs. Thornfield said, setting a folder on Emma's desk. The Minister of Education has requested to move your meeting to this afternoon, as he needs to address Parliament about the budget amendments. The Ladies' Auxiliary has asked if you would be willing to speak briefly about the new pediatric wing funding at today's luncheon. And Mrs. Thornfield paused, her professional composure slipping slightly. Yes, Emma prompted. Dr. Morrison has requested a brief meeting before his departure this afternoon. He asked me to assure you that it would be entirely professional in nature, related to transitioning his hospital responsibilities. Emma's heart lurched. She had assumed that their goodbye last night would be their final one, that James would leave without further contact to avoid making their separation more difficult. The thought of seeing him again, in daylight, with the reality of his departure immediate and concrete, seemed almost unbearable. Did he say what time? She asked, proud that her voice remained steady. 2 o'clock, Your Highness. In the blue drawing room, with Mrs. Henderson from the hospital board present as a chaperone. Of course there would be a chaperone. Even James's final professional meeting with her required oversight to prevent any appearance of impropriety. The irony of needing supervision to say goodbye to the man she loved was not lost on Emma. Very well, she said. Please confirm the meeting and ensure that it's scheduled for 30 minutes only. The morning passed in a haze of routine obligations that Emma performed automatically while her mind remained focused on the approaching 2 o'clock meeting. She reviewed education proposals without really reading them, signed correspondence without focusing on the contents, and rehearsed conversations she knew she would never have. At precisely 2 o'clock, Emma entered the blue drawing room to find James standing near the tall windows that overlooked the palace courtyard. He was dressed in a dark business suit rather than his usual hospital attire, and he looked tired and strained. Mrs. Henderson, a dignified woman in her 60s who served on the hospital's board of directors, sat at the mahogany table with several folders spread before her. Your Royal Highness, Mrs. Henderson said, rising to curtsy. Thank you for taking time to meet with us during this transition period. Of course, Emma replied, taking her seat at the table and carefully avoiding direct eye contact with James. Dr. Morrison's work with the pediatric neurology department has been invaluable. I want to ensure a smooth transition. James took his seat across from her, maintaining the same professional distance. I've prepared detailed notes on all ongoing cases and research projects, he said, his voice carefully neutral. Dr. Williams will be taking over my duties, and I've briefed her extensively on the protocols we've developed. For the next 20 minutes, they discussed medical procedures and hospital policies with the same formal courtesy they might have used with strangers. Emma found herself studying James's hands as he shuffled through his documents, remembering how those same hands had held hers just 12 hours earlier. She noticed that he was wearing the watch she had given him for his birthday, a simple, elegant piece that didn't draw attention but had been chosen specifically because she knew he would think of her every time he checked the time. The scholarship program you established will continue under the Foundation's oversight, Mrs. Henderson was saying. Your initial framework was so thorough that it should be self-sustaining. I'm glad to hear that, James replied. Those students represent the future of medical care in underserved communities. It was always meant to be bigger than any one person's involvement. Emma recognized the subtle message in his words. Everything James had built was designed to continue without him, just as her life was designed to continue without him in it. The parallel was painful and clear. Dr. Morrison, Emma said, finally, allowing herself to look directly at him. I want to personally thank you for your service to the kingdom's healthcare initiatives. Your dedication has been exemplary. Their eyes met across the table, and, for just a moment, the formal facade slipped. Emma saw the love and pain and regret that James was working so hard to hide, and she knew he could see the same emotions reflected in her own expression. It has been my honor to serve, Your Royal Highness, James replied. I hope the work we've begun will continue to make a difference for years to come. Mrs. Henderson gathered her papers, apparently satisfied that the professional transition had been properly addressed. Dr. Morrison's flight to Bangkok departs at 6 this evening, she said. The car will arrive at 4:30 to take him to the airport. 2.5 hours. Emma felt something cold and final settle in her chest. In 2.5 hours, James would be gone from her life forever. I wish you the very best in your new position, Dr. Morrison, Emma said, standing as the meeting concluded. I'm sure your work with Doctors Without Borders will save many lives. James stood as well, and, for a moment, Emma thought he might say something more, something that acknowledged what this goodbye really meant. Instead, he simply bowed formally. Thank you, Your Royal Highness. It has been a privilege. As Mrs. Henderson and James prepared to leave, Emma made a decision that surprised even herself. Mrs. Henderson, would you mind if I had a brief word with Dr. Morrison about the Foundation's future medical partnerships? Just a few minutes. Mrs. Henderson looked uncertain, but protocol dictated that she could hardly refuse a direct request from the princess. Of course, Your Royal Highness. I'll wait in the hallway. When the door closed behind Mrs. Henderson, Emma and James stood alone in the formal drawing room, surrounded by centuries of royal history and tradition. The silence stretched between them, filled with everything they couldn't say. Emma, James began, then stopped himself. Your Royal Highness, I hope you know that none of this changes how I feel about you. Don't, Emma said quickly. Please don't make this harder than it already is. James nodded, understanding immediately. I need you to promise me something, he said. Promise me that you won't let this experience make you cynical about love. Someday, when the time is right and the person is right, allow yourself to be happy again. The request nearly broke her heart. Even in his own pain, James was thinking about her future happiness, wanting to protect her from becoming bitter or closed off because of their failed relationship. I promise, she whispered, if you promise me the same thing. Promise me that you'll find someone who appreciates how extraordinary you are, someone who can love you without complications or obstacles. I promise, James replied, though they both knew that some loves leave marks too deep for other relationships to heal completely. Emma wanted to memorize this moment, the afternoon light on James's face, the way he stood with his hands clasped behind his back, the small scar near his eyebrow that she had kissed so many times. She wanted to store every detail against the empty years ahead. I should go, James said finally. Mrs. Henderson will be wondering about the delay. Emma nodded, not trusting herself to speak. James moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. Emma, in another life, we would have been so happy together. In another life, she agreed, her voice barely audible. After he left, Emma remained standing in the blue drawing room for a long time, surrounded by portraits of her ancestors who had faced their own impossible choices between love and duty. Some of them had chosen love and paid devastating prices. Others had chosen duty and lived with quiet regret for the rest of their lives. She wondered if any of them had ever found a way to choose both, or if that kind of happiness was simply not meant for people born to carry crowns. At 4:15, Emma stood at her bedroom window and watched a black sedan pull up to the palace's side entrance. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she saw James emerge from the building, carrying a single suitcase and a leather briefcase. He paused for just a moment and looked up at the windows, though Emma was certain he couldn't see her behind the curtains. Then, he got into the car, and the sedan pulled away from the palace, carrying him out of her life, and toward a future that would unfold thousands of miles away from everything they had shared. Emma pressed her forehead against the cool glass and, finally, allowed herself to cry again, knowing that this time, the tears were truly the end. Tomorrow she would have to begin the process of rebuilding her life without James in it, of returning to being Princess Emma rather than simply Emma in love. But, tonight, she grieved for the woman she had been when she was loved completely and unconditionally, and wondered if that version of herself would ever exist again. 3 weeks had passed since James's departure, and Emma had discovered that grief was not a linear process. Some mornings she woke with a sense of purpose and determination, ready to throw herself into her royal duties and prove that she could move forward with dignity. Other mornings, like this one, she woke with the crushing weight of his absence pressing down on her chest, making even the simple act of getting out of bed feel overwhelming. The palace felt different without the possibility of seeing James at official functions or medical conferences. Emma found herself unconsciously looking for him in crowds, listening for his voice in conversations, expecting him to appear around corners where he would never be again. The rational part of her mind understood that he was gone, but her heart seemed determined to ignore that reality. Today marked the official launch of the new Children's Medical Research Initiative, a project that Emma and James had worked on together for months. The irony was bitter. What should have been a celebration of their shared vision had become a painful reminder of everything she had lost. Standing before the gathered crowd of doctors, researchers, and donors, Emma felt like she was performing a play about someone else's life. "Ladies and gentlemen," Emma began, her voice projecting clearly across the hospital's main conference hall. "We gather today to launch an initiative that represents the very best of our kingdom's commitment to healing and hope." The prepared speech felt hollow in her mouth. Every word had been carefully crafted by her communications team to sound inspiring and forward-looking, but Emma could only think about the conversations she and James had shared while developing this program. Late-night planning sessions in her private study, passionate debates about funding priorities, shared excitement over breakthrough research possibilities. All of it felt like a lifetime ago. The Children's Medical Research Initiative will provide funding for innovative treatments, advanced surgical techniques, and comprehensive care programs that will serve as a model for pediatric medicine worldwide. She continued, reading from the carefully typed cards that Mrs. Thornfield had prepared. In the audience, she could see Dr. Williams, who had taken over James's position as head of pediatric neurosurgery. Dr. Williams was brilliant and dedicated, everything the program needed in a leader, but her presence only served to highlight James's absence more starkly. Emma wondered if Dr. Williams knew about her relationship with James, if she had been briefed about the personal complications that had led to the sudden leadership change. This initiative exists because of the vision and dedication of many individuals who refuse to accept limitations in pediatric care, Emma said, and for just a moment, her voice caught slightly. Their commitment to healing, to innovation, to serving others above themselves, reminds us that medicine is not just a science, it is a calling. She was thinking of James now, not reading from her prepared remarks. The audience seemed to sense the shift in her tone, leaning forward slightly as her words became more personal and authentic. "I have had the privilege of working closely with many of the medical professionals in this room," Emma continued, abandoning her script entirely. "I have seen the dedication required to save lives, the personal sacrifices made in service of healing others, the courage needed to attempt the impossible when a child's life hangs in the balance. That level of commitment humbles me and inspires me every day." After the official ceremony, Emma found herself in the hospital's pediatric ward, visiting children who were benefiting from the new research programs. This had always been her favorite part of these official visits, the chance to move beyond speeches and photo opportunities to spend real time with the young patients and their families. In the cancer ward, she met 8-year-old Sophie, who was recovering from a complex brain surgery. Sophie had drawn a picture of the operation, complete with carefully colored diagrams of surgical instruments and a smiling stick figure labeled Dr. James, holding a tiny brain. "He's not here anymore," Sophie told Emma matter-of-factly as she showed off her artwork. "He went away to help other sick children far away. But he taught Dr. Williams everything he knows, so I'm still going to get better." Emma felt her composure slip as she looked at the child's drawing. James had obviously made a profound impression on Sophie, taking time to explain the surgery in terms a child could understand, making her feel safe and cared for during a terrifying experience. "Dr. James was a wonderful doctor," Emma managed to say. "I'm sure he would love to see your beautiful picture. Maybe you could send it to him?" Sophie asked hopefully. "Mama says he's in a place called Thailand, helping children who don't have good hospitals like we do." Emma promised she would find a way to get the drawing to James, though she had no idea how to fulfill that promise without breaking her own heart in the process. As she moved through the ward, she encountered more evidence of James's impact. Thank you cards from families, photographs of him with young patients, testimonials from other medical staff about his teaching and mentorship. By the time Emma returned to the palace that afternoon, she was emotionally drained and struggling to maintain her composure. She had managed to get through the public appearances and formal meetings, but the cost of that performance was becoming harder to bear with each passing day. Margaret was waiting in Emma's private sitting room when she arrived, curled up in the window seat with a cup of tea and a stack of newspapers. "How did today go?" Margaret asked, setting aside the papers as Emma collapsed into her favorite armchair. "Difficult," Emma admitted, not bothering to maintain the pretense of being fine. "Everything reminds me of him, Maggie. The research initiative, the hospital, even the children's artwork. It's like he's everywhere and nowhere at the same time." Margaret studied her sister's face with concern. "You look exhausted, Em. When was the last time you had a full night's sleep?" Emma couldn't remember. Sleep had become elusive since James left, her mind too active and her heart too heavy to find rest easily. She spent most nights reading or working on correspondence, trying to tire herself enough to slip into unconsciousness without having to face the quiet darkness where memories lived. "I've been thinking," Margaret said carefully, "about what you told me about James's reasons for leaving. About him not wanting to change who you are or compromise your work." "Maggie, please don't. Just hear me out," Margaret interrupted. "Has he been in contact at all? Any word about how he's adjusting to the new position?" Emma shook her head. "Nothing, which is probably for the best. A clean break is supposed to make moving on easier." "According to whom?" Margaret asked. "Emma, you loved each other deeply for almost 3 years. You shared hopes and dreams and built something beautiful together. Pretending that relationship never existed isn't healthy, and it's not fair to either of you." "What would you have me do?" Emma asked, her voice sharper than she intended. "Write him letters? Call him? Maintain some kind of connection that makes it impossible for either of us to heal?" "I would have you be honest about what you're feeling instead of performing royal stoicism for everyone around you," Margaret replied. "I would have you acknowledge that grief is a natural response to losing someone you love, and that pretending to be fine when you're clearly not is helping no one." Emma was quiet for a long moment, recognizing the truth in her sister's words. Since James's departure, she had thrown herself into her royal duties with renewed intensity, accepting additional engagements, extending her working hours, keeping herself so busy that she had little time to process her emotions. "The protocol staff loves it," Emma said finally. "Mrs. Thornfield says I'm more focused and productive than I've ever been. Father mentioned that I seem to have recommitted myself to my responsibilities with impressive dedication." "And how do you feel?" Margaret asked gently. Emma laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I feel like I'm sleepwalking through my own life. I feel like I'm performing the role of Princess Emma while the real Emma, the one who knew how to laugh and hope and love freely, has disappeared entirely." It was the most honest thing Emma had said about her state of mind since James left, and admitting it out loud made her realize how deeply concerned she should be about her emotional well-being. "I keep telling myself that this will get easier," Emma continued. "That eventually I'll stop looking for him in crowds, stop expecting him to call, stop planning conversations we'll never have. But it's been 3 weeks, and if anything, it's getting harder." Margaret moved from the window seat to sit on the arm of Emma's chair, the way she had done when they were children seeking comfort from each other after nightmares or disappointments. "Maybe," Margaret said softly, "it's getting harder because you're trying to erase something that was fundamentally important to who you are. Maybe healing doesn't mean forgetting James or pretending your relationship didn't matter. Maybe it means finding a way to honor what you had while still moving forward." That evening, Emma sat in her study with a piece of palace letterhead in front of her, trying to compose a response to Sophie's request to send her drawing to James. It seemed like such a simple task: address an envelope, write a brief note explaining the gift, send it along with the child's artwork. But every attempt at writing felt loaded with implications and emotions that Emma wasn't sure she was ready to confront. After an hour of false starts, she finally wrote, "Dr. Morrison, I hope this letter finds you well and that your work in Thailand is progressing successfully. I am forwarding a drawing from one of your former patients, Sophie Martinez, who specifically requested that it be sent to you. She wanted you to see her artistic interpretation of the surgery you performed, and I thought you would appreciate knowing how positively your care affected her recovery process." The Children's Medical Research Initiative launched successfully last week, and the early response from the medical community has been very encouraging. Your foundational work on this project continues to benefit countless young patients. I wish you continued success in your important work abroad. Sincerely, Princess Emma Catherine Whitmore*. The letter was formal, professional, and completely devoid of any personal emotion. Exactly what protocol would demand for correspondence between a member of the royal family and a former palace-affiliated medical professional. But, as Emma sealed the envelope, she felt like she was burying another piece of her authentic self beneath layers of appropriate behavior. 2 weeks later, an unexpected reply arrived through official channels. Mrs. Thornfield brought it to Emma during her morning briefing. Among the usual collection of invitations, thank you notes, and official correspondence. A letter from Dr. Morrison, Your Highness, Mrs. Thornfield said, placing the envelope on Emma's desk. It came through the diplomatic pouch from our embassy in Bangkok. Emma's heart rate accelerated as she recognized James's handwriting on the address. She forced herself to wait until Mrs. Thornfield left the room before opening the letter with trembling fingers. Your Royal Highness, thank you for forwarding Sophie's drawing. It arrived at a time when I particularly needed to be reminded why this work matters. The conditions here are challenging, but the opportunity to help establish surgical programs that will serve these communities for years to come makes every difficulty worthwhile. Sophie's artistic interpretation of brain surgery brought smiles to all the medical staff here. I have shared her drawing with several young patients who are facing similar procedures, and it has become an unexpected source of comfort and hope. Please tell her that her artwork is making a difference in lives she will never know about, which I think she would appreciate. I was pleased to hear about the successful launch of the research initiative. Knowing that project is moving forward and fulfilling its potential provides great satisfaction. I hope your other charitable endeavors are progressing well and that you are finding fulfillment in your important work. Respectfully, James Alexander Morrison*. Emma read the letter 3 times, searching for any hint of personal emotion beneath the carefully neutral language. Like her own correspondence, James's letter maintained perfect professional distance while acknowledging their shared history only in terms of work and mutual patience. But Emma could read between the lines. The mention of needing reminders about why his work mattered suggested he was struggling with the transition. The careful phrasing about finding fulfillment implied he was concerned about her well-being, just as she was concerned about his. The formal signature, using his full name rather than simply James, felt like a deliberate reminder of the distance between them now. That afternoon, Emma found herself in the palace gardens, walking the paths she and James had strolled together during their secret early morning meetings. She had avoided this part of the grounds since his departure, but today she felt drawn to revisit the places where they had been happiest together. She stopped at the small rose garden where James had first told her he loved her, 6 months earlier on a warm summer evening after a particularly successful charity gala. They had been discussing the evening's fundraising results when James had suddenly gone quiet, looking at Emma with an expression of such tenderness that it took her breath away. What is it? She had asked, and James had reached out to touch a pale pink rose that matched the color of her evening gown. I love you, he had said simply. I know all the reasons why that's complicated and probably impossible, but I needed you to know that loving you has become as natural and necessary as breathing. Emma had kissed him then, surrounded by the fragrance of roses and the soft light of the garden lanterns, feeling like the luckiest woman in the world to be loved by someone so good and genuine. Now, standing in the same spot 5 months later, Emma felt the weight of all the choices that had led to this moment of solitude. She understood more clearly than ever why James had chosen to leave, why he believed their love was incompatible with the lives they were meant to live. But understanding his reasoning didn't make accepting it any easier. As she walked back toward the palace, Emma made a decision that surprised her. She would write to James again, not about patience or professional matters, but about the question that had been haunting her since he left. Was there really no way for love to coexist with duty, or had they simply been too afraid to fight for the possibility? It was a dangerous question to ask, one that could reopen wounds that were barely beginning to heal. But Emma was beginning to realize that some questions demanded answers, even when those answers might change everything. Emma spent 3 days composing a letter she wasn't sure she would ever send. Each draft felt either too formal to be meaningful or too emotional to be appropriate. She wrote and rewrote paragraphs, struggling to find the balance between honesty and propriety, between reaching out and respecting the boundaries they had established. Finally, on a rainy Thursday evening in her private study, she settled on words that felt true. Dear James, I find myself wondering if we made the right choice. Not whether it was the expected choice, or the safe choice, or the choice that disappointed the fewest people, but whether it was right for us, for the people we are when we strip away all the titles and expectations and fears. I think about Sophie's drawing, and how you took time to explain complex medical procedures to a frightened child, making her feel brave and understood. I think about the scholarship students whose lives you've changed, the research programs you've initiated, the countless ways you've used your gifts to serve others. That kind of goodness, that level of genuine care for humanity. Isn't that exactly what the monarchy should represent? I have been the dutiful princess for 3 weeks now, attending functions and cutting ribbons and making speeches about causes that matter to me. But I feel like I'm sleepwalking through a performance of my own life. The woman who laughed with you, who shared dreams with you, who believed she could change the world, where did she go? I don't expect you to answer this letter. I don't even know if I should send it. But I needed to tell someone who truly knows me that I'm not sure we chose love or duty. I think we chose fear. Always. Emma *. She sealed the letter before she could change her mind, addressing it through the same official channels as before. It would take a week to reach Bangkok, if James was even still there. For all she knew, his assignment with Doctors Without Borders might have taken him deeper into remote areas where mail was unreliable or impossible. The uncertainty of whether he would receive her words, let alone how he might respond to them, added another layer of anxiety to Emma's already fragmented emotional state. She had crossed a line with that letter, moving beyond professional courtesy into deeply personal territory. There was no taking it back now. 2 weeks passed without a response. Emma threw herself into her royal duties with even greater intensity, accepting additional engagements and extending her working days until exhaustion became her primary coping mechanism. She inaugurated a new community center, hosted a reception for visiting foreign ministers, and delivered the keynote address at a conference on sustainable development. Everyone remarked on her renewed dedication and focus. The press wrote glowing articles about Princess Emma's commitment to service and her mature handling of recent personal challenges. Parliament members praised her increased involvement in policy discussions. On the surface, Emma appeared to be thriving in her role as a dedicated royal. But Margaret saw through the performance. "You're going to make yourself sick if you keep this up," Margaret said, confronting Emma in her private chambers after a particularly grueling day of back-to-back appointments. "When was the last time you ate a full meal? Or slept for more than 4 hours? Or did anything just because you enjoyed it?" Emma looked up from the briefing documents she had been reviewing for the next day's meetings. She couldn't remember the answers to any of Margaret's questions, which was probably answer enough. "I'm fine, Maggie. I'm just taking my responsibilities seriously." "You're running away from your feelings by burying yourself in work," Margaret replied bluntly. "And it's not sustainable. You look like you've lost 10 pounds. You're snapping at staff members who don't deserve it. And yesterday, I watched you stare at a wall for 5 minutes in the middle of a conversation." Emma wanted to deny Margaret's observations, but she couldn't. The past few weeks had become a blur of official obligations punctuated by brief periods of restless sleep and mechanical meals. She was functioning, but she wasn't living. "Did you ever write to James?" Margaret asked gently. Emma nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. "And no response, which is probably for the best. I shouldn't have written to him in the first place." Margaret sat down beside Emma on the small sofa where she had been working. "What did you say in the letter?" Emma found herself telling Margaret about the letter, about the questions that had been haunting her, about the growing certainty that they had made their choice based on fear rather than wisdom. Margaret listened without judgment, occasionally asking gentle questions that helped Emma articulate feelings she had been struggling to understand. "Do you regret writing it?" Margaret asked when Emma finished. "I regret the uncertainty," Emma replied honestly. "Not knowing if he received it, how he felt reading it, whether I've made everything worse by reopening wounds that were starting to heal. Or whether you've opened a door that needed to be opened," Margaret suggested. 3 days later, Mrs. Thornfield delivered another letter from Bangkok. Emma's hands shook as she opened it, unprepared for the length of James's response or the emotion evident even in his careful handwriting. "Dearest Emma, your letter found me at a moment when I was questioning many of the same things you wrote about. I have been in Thailand for over a month now, working in conditions that challenge everything I thought I knew about medicine and service. The need here is overwhelming, the resources limited, and every day I see children who might have been saved with earlier intervention or better equipment. But I also see incredible courage, both in my young patients and in their families. Yesterday, I operated on a 6-year-old boy whose parents had carried him for 3 days through difficult terrain to reach our clinic. They had sold everything they owned to pay for transportation, arriving with nothing but their son and absolute faith that we could help him. The surgery was successful, and watching him take his first steps afterward reminded me why I became a doctor in the first place. Yet through all of this meaningful work, I think about you every day. I wonder if you're happy, if you're finding fulfillment in your royal duties, if you ever think about the conversations we used to have about changing the world together. I wonder if the woman I fell in love with, brilliant, compassionate, fiercely determined to make a difference, is still there beneath all the protocol and expectations. You asked whether we chose love or duty, or whether we chose fear. I think we chose what felt safe for everyone else while ignoring what felt right for us. I think we allowed other people's concerns about tradition and propriety to override our own judgment about what we could accomplish together. I have been thinking about a conversation we had last spring, when you told me about Queen Victoria's quote, "The important thing is not what they think of me, but what I think of myself, that I have done the right thing." We spent so much energy worrying about what others would think of our relationship that we forgot to ask ourselves what we thought of our decision to end it. I miss you, Emma. I miss your laugh, your insights, your way of seeing possibilities where others see only obstacles. I miss the team we were, working together on projects that mattered. I miss the man I was when I was with you, more confident, more ambitious, more certain that love and service could coexist beautifully. I don't know what any of this means or where it leads us. I am committed to completing my assignment here, which will last another 18 months at minimum. You have responsibilities and obligations that I understand and respect, but I needed you to know that leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done, and not a day goes by that I don't question whether it was necessary. If there is a way for us to find our way back to each other, not immediately, not without careful thought and planning, but eventually, I want to find it. If there is a way for love to coexist with duty, for personal happiness to enhance rather than compromise public service, I want to explore it. I love you, Emma. I have never stopped loving you, and I don't think I ever will. Forever yours, James. Emma read the letter twice before the full impact of his words settled in. James hadn't moved on. He was questioning their decision as deeply as she was. He wanted to find a way back to her. The relief was overwhelming, followed immediately by a dozen new complications. James was still half a world away with a year and a half remaining in his assignment. Emma was still bound by royal protocols and family expectations. Nothing about their fundamental situation had changed, except that now they both acknowledged their continuing love and their regret about ending their relationship. But, for the first time in weeks, Emma felt something other than grief and emptiness. She felt hope, fragile and uncertain, but unmistakably real. That evening, Emma requested a private meeting with her father. King Edward received her in his study, surrounded by the same leather-bound books and formal portraits that had intimidated her as a child. Now, at 26, Emma felt less intimidated by the trappings of royal authority and more confident in her own judgment. "Father, I need to discuss something important with you," she began, settling into the chair across from his massive oak desk. King Edward looked up from the parliamentary briefings he had been reviewing, immediately focusing his full attention on his daughter. Despite the formal setting, Emma could see genuine concern in his expression. "Of course, my dear. You've seemed troubled lately. How can I help?" Emma had rehearsed this conversation in her mind, but now that the moment had arrived, she found herself speaking more candidly than she had intended. "I've been in contact with James," she said. "We've been corresponding about our personal situation, and I've realized that we ended our relationship for the wrong reasons." King Edward set down his papers, his expression becoming more serious. "Emma, I thought we had resolved this matter. Dr. Morrison has moved on to important work abroad, and you have refocused on your royal duties. Reopening old wounds serves no one. But they aren't old wounds, Father. They're current wounds, and they're not healing because we didn't address the real issues. We let fear and protocol dictate our choice instead of considering whether there might be another way." "What other way?" King Edward asked. "The fundamental challenges haven't changed. Dr. Morrison remains a commoner without the background or training necessary for royal life. The media attention would be intense and potentially damaging. Parliament would question the appropriateness of the match." Emma had expected these objections, and she was prepared to address them thoughtfully. James has spent 3 years attending royal functions, working with palace staff, and conducting himself with perfect dignity in every situation. He's not unprepared for royal life. He's already been living it. As for media attention, the public response to our relationship was largely positive when it was revealed. People appreciated seeing authenticity and genuine emotion from the royal family. And Parliament. King Edward pressed. Parliament represents people who believe in love, family, and personal happiness, Emma replied. Many of them are in marriages based on love rather than political advantage. Why should they expect less for their princess? King Edward was quiet for a moment, considering Emma's arguments. What exactly are you proposing, Emma? I'm proposing that we explore whether there's a path forward for James and me that honors both love and duty, Emma said. Not immediately, not without careful planning and preparation, but eventually. I'm proposing that we consider whether a princess can marry for love and still serve her people effectively. And Dr. Morrison? Is he willing to abandon his humanitarian work to take on royal responsibilities? Emma smiled for the first time in the conversation. James would never abandon humanitarian work, father, but he could pursue it as part of his royal duties. Imagine the impact if the royal family had a working physician as a member. Imagine the medical initiatives we could launch, the global health programs we could lead, the example we could set for combining personal expertise with public service. King Edward leaned back in his chair, and Emma could see him genuinely considering her words rather than simply defending the status quo. This would require extensive planning, he said finally. Constitutional consultations, parliamentary discussions, careful media management. It couldn't be rushed or handled carelessly. I understand that, Emma said. I'm not asking for immediate action. I'm asking for the possibility of exploring this option seriously. And you're certain this is what you want? You're willing to face the scrutiny and challenges that come with defying conventional expectations. Emma thought about James's letter, about the man she was when she was with him, about the future they could build together in service of others. I'm certain that I want to find out if it's possible, she said. I'm certain that the woman I was with James, more confident, more passionate about my work, more authentic in my public role, is someone worth fighting for. King Edward nodded slowly. Very well. I'll speak with the constitutional advisors and begin exploring what would be required for such an arrangement. But, Emma, you must understand that this process could take months or even years to resolve, and there are no guarantees about the outcome. I understand, Emma replied. But, for the first time in weeks, I feel like myself again. That has to count for something. As Emma left her father's study, she felt lighter than she had since James's departure. The path forward was uncertain and would undoubtedly be complicated, but, for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that there might actually be a path forward. That night, she sat down to write another letter to James, this one filled with hope rather than despair.